The year was 670 CE, and the world stood on the cusp of a transformative era. The ancient city of Constantinople, known to some as the City of the World's Desire, was an unrivaled jewel of the Byzantine Empire. Its golden domes shone in the morning light, and its towering walls stretched toward the sky, a symbol of imperial pride and divine protection. This city, with its rich tapestry of faith, culture, and history, was about to face a challenge unlike any it had ever known. The air was thick with the hum of anticipation as the winds of war began to stir. On the shores of the Bosphorus, the great ships of the Islamic Caliphate approached, bringing with them a force led by the brilliant commander, Rami ibn Khalid. Rami was a man of unwavering faith, a fierce warrior with a vision that extended beyond mere conquest. He had seen victory on the battlefield before, and his name had become synonymous with courage and strategy. Yet even he could not shake the sense of reverence and awe that gripped him as he gazed upon the city that had long been the jewel of the Christian world. The Byzantine Empire, led by Emperor Constans II, had long been a powerful force in the Mediterranean. But the empire's vast wealth and culture had made it a prime target. The walls of Constantinople were legendary, said to be impenetrable, designed to withstand not only the assault of enemy forces, but also the ravages of time itself. Rami, along with his troops, stood on the deck of his ship as they drew closer to the city. He had heard the stories of Byzantine resilience, of the city's unyielding defense in the face of adversity. But the stakes were higher now. This was not just about conquest. It was a mission to bring the message of Islam to a world steeped in tradition and power. Constantinople was not just another city. It was a symbol of Christian strength, a beacon of the faith that had dominated much of the world for centuries. The Byzantine Empire had seen itself as the spiritual and political heir to the Roman Empire, with its riches, libraries, and scholars casting a long shadow over the surrounding lands. For centuries it had stood as the gatekeeper between Europe and the East, its influence stretching far and wide. As Rami looked upon the walls of the city, he felt a weight in his chest, a combination of awe and resolve. He had faced countless battles, but this one felt different. This was not simply a clash of armies. It was a clash of ideologies, of faiths, and of destinies. The light of Islam, which had already spread across vast lands, was now challenging the heart of Christendom. The Muslims, under Rami's command, were determined. Their faith burned brightly, and their mission was clear: to bring the teachings of Islam to the people of Constantinople. But as Rami stood there, watching the city grow ever closer, he couldn't help but think of the people within those walls. The Christians, the Jews, and others who had made this city their home for generations. Would they accept the message of Islam, or would they fight to preserve their way of life? This was a question that gnawed at his heart as the ships drew nearer. The calm waters of the Bosphorus began to stir with the energy of the coming storm. The Byzantines, too, felt the tremors of the impending siege. The city's inhabitants were unaware of the full scale of the forces that were gathering, but they knew enough to understand that something momentous was on the horizon. The whispers of an approaching army grew louder in the streets, and the city's leaders began to prepare for the inevitable. Emperor Constans II, who ruled with both wisdom and fear, had already begun to strengthen the defenses of the city. He knew the reputation of the Muslim army, and he knew that the fate of his empire, perhaps the fate of Christianity itself, hung in the balance. But amid the political machinations and military preparations, there was a quieter undercurrent. Rami's heart, strong as it was, could not ignore the pull of faith that guided his every decision. He had not come simply to conquer. He had come to share a message of peace and light. The struggle for Constantinople was not just a fight for power. It was a struggle for the soul of a city, for the hearts and minds of its people. And in those hearts, there was a flicker of something Rami knew all too well. Love. Love for their city. Love for their faith. Love for a way of life that had sustained them for generations. Yet, even as Rami prepared for the battle that would come, he knew that love could be both a weapon and a shield. And in this great city, where faith and love were interwoven into the very fabric of life, there was no easy path to victory. The heart of Byzantium would not be taken without a fight. But perhaps, in the end, it was love itself, the love for God, for country, and for each other, that would determine the true outcome of the siege. As Rami's ships drew closer, the tension mounted, not just in the city of Constantinople, but within him as well. What would it mean to bring his faith to this sacred place? Would it be a victory of arms, or a victory of the heart? The answer, he knew, would come only with time, and with the courage to face whatever awaited on the other side of those towering walls. And so, as the siege began, the city of Constantinople found itself on the precipice of a new era. It was a time of war, but also a time of great change, when faith, love, and the future of an empire would collide in the most unexpected of ways. The fate of Constantinople and the hearts of those who called it home would be determined not by the strength of the walls that surrounded them, but by the strength of the hearts within. The storm was gathering, and soon the gates of Constantinople would open to a new chapter in its storied history. As the days passed, and the vast Muslim fleet anchored just outside the mighty walls of Constantinople, a heavy silence fell over the Byzantine city. The once bustling streets, filled with merchants and citizens going about their daily lives, now seemed eerily quiet. There was a palpable sense of unease in the air, the kind of tension that precedes the clash of great armies. The distant hum of the Muslim warships on the Bosphorus, their sails swaying like dark clouds on the horizon, became a constant reminder of the impending storm. In the imperial palace, Emperor Constans II stood at a balcony overlooking the city, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. He had lived his entire life under the protection of the great walls, confident that no army, no matter how mighty, could breach the stronghold. But even he could not deny the gravity of the situation. He had heard the whispers. The Caliphate's forces, led by Rami ibn Khalid, were formidable, not only in number, but in their unwavering resolve. The city had withstood countless sieges in the past, but this felt different. This was not just a battle for land. It was a battle for the soul of the empire itself. "Majesty," a voice called out from behind him, breaking his reverie. It was General Justinian, one of the Empire's most trusted commanders. "Our defenses are in place. The people are prepared. But I fear that even with our walls and our army, we may not be able to withstand a prolonged siege." Constans turned to face his general, his gaze steely yet burdened. "We will not yield, Justinian. The city has stood for over 1,000 years. It will stand for another 1,000. We have no choice but to fight." He paused, his voice softer now. "But this is more than a battle of armies. I sense that this war is not only about territory. The Muslims believe in something greater, something beyond just conquest." Justinian nodded, his brow furrowed. "Faith. They fight for something that transcends this world." "Yes," Constans said, his voice a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Faith is their weapon. It will not be easy to defeat." "Would you like to continue with this style for the rest?" "For, O many." You said, "Yes, continue with this style." ChatGPT said, "ChatGPT, certainly." Here's the continuation with the same style. On the shores of the Bosphorus, Rami ibn Khalid stood silently on the deck of his ship, watching the city of Constantinople grow ever larger before him. His army, a diverse and disciplined force made up of men from many lands, had traveled far to reach this point. They had crossed deserts, mountains, and seas. They had endured hardship and loss, but their faith had kept them strong. Rami himself was a man of deep conviction, a believer in the power of Allah's will. Yet even he felt a strange, almost magnetic pull as he gazed upon the city that seemed so distant from everything he had ever known. Constantinople was not merely a city. It was an idea, a symbol of the old world, of an empire that had once stretched its influence from the sands of the desert to the northernmost reaches of Europe. It was a bastion of Christianity, a city where the teachings of the Church had shaped the lives of its people for centuries. But now, it stood as a challenge to the Muslim world, a challenge that Rami was determined to face. The Muslim fleet had already set up a blockade along the shores, cutting off any reinforcements or supplies from reaching the city. The Byzantine defenders, entrenched within their walls, prepared for the inevitable battle. But Rami knew that this was not simply a matter of military tactics. His mission, as he saw it, was to bring Islam to a city that had long resisted the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH. It was a daunting task, but he believed that the faith he carried in his heart would guide him, just as it had guided his people across vast lands. As Rami paced along the deck, his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his trusted lieutenant, Khalid ibn Umar. "Commander, the time has come. We will begin the siege at dawn tomorrow." Rami nodded, his expression resolute. "We will be patient, but we will also be relentless. The city will either fall to the power of Islam, or it will submit to its fate." Khalid, ever the strategist, spoke with measured confidence. "We are not just fighting for land, Rami. We are fighting for hearts and minds. The people of Constantinople have lived under the shadow of their faith for centuries. We must show them the light, but we must also be prepared for their resistance." Rami's gaze softened. "Yes, they will resist, but we fight not with sword alone, but with the truth. The city will see that Allah's message is the way forward." Back in Constantinople, the imperial court was in turmoil. Constans II convened his advisors in the grand hall of the palace, a place that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless emperors. The walls, adorned with murals depicting the triumphs of the Byzantine Empire, now seemed to close in around the council, their grandeur overshadowed by the dire situation at hand. "My lord," said a high-ranking bishop, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and authority, "we must prepare for the worst. The city's walls are strong, but we cannot withstand a siege indefinitely. We need reinforcements from the west, perhaps from the Frankish kingdoms or even from Rome." Constans shook his head. "It is too late for reinforcements. We must rely on our own strength, our own faith. The walls may protect us for a time, but it is our spirit that will determine our survival." The bishop, however, was unconvinced. "Faith alone will not save us. We are fighting not only against an army, but against an ideology that has already conquered vast lands. The message of Islam is powerful. That is why we must be stronger still, Constans replied, his voice firm. We have survived countless threats. We will survive this one as well. The people of Constantinople will never submit. Our faith in Christ, in the Holy Trinity, is unshakable. But as the emperor spoke, even he could not shake the growing sense of doubt within his heart. Could the walls of Constantinople withstand not just the force of an army, but the force of a belief so deeply rooted in the hearts of its people? The coming days would test not just the strength of the city, but the strength of its faith. And for Rami ibn Khalid, the fate of the city would not simply be determined by the clash of steel, but by the hearts and minds of those within it. As the first day of the siege dawned, the sun cast a golden light over the walls of Constantinople, bathing the city in an ethereal glow. On the ships below, Rami ibn Khalid stood at the bow, his heart filled with resolve. The battle for the soul of the city had begun, and there was no turning back now. In the streets of Constantinople, the defenders prepared for the worst. The citizens, many of whom had never known war, gathered in the churches, praying for divine intervention. They had heard of the Muslim forces, heard of their victories and their unshakable faith. But they also knew of the power of their own faith, and they clung to the belief that God would protect them from the storm that was about to break upon their city. For both sides, the siege was not just about military strategy. It was about faith. The outcome of the battle, the future of Constantinople, would depend not just on the strength of their walls, but on the strength of their hearts. As the days passed, the intensity of the siege only grew. The once peaceful and vibrant city of Constantinople became a battlefield of uncertainty and fear. From the highest towers to the narrowest streets, the entire city was on edge. The Byzantine defenders, though fiercely loyal to their emperor and faith, found themselves in a state of constant alert. The Muslim forces, under the leadership of Rami ibn Khalid, had proven relentless, their siege machines battering the walls, and their warriors launching nightly raids to wear down the defenders. Within the heart of Constantinople, the city's inner sanctum, the Hagia Sophia, a grand cathedral known as the Church of the Holy Wisdom, stood as a symbol of divine protection. Its vast domes and intricate mosaics had witnessed countless generations of believers, and within its walls prayers were offered day and night. In the flickering candlelight, the faithful gathered in deep reverence, seeking solace from their God. But even inside the sanctuary of their faith, doubt lingered. Could this holy place protect them from the fury of the Muslim warriors who believed they fought for a higher cause? Could prayer alone save a city as mighty as Constantinople? As night fell, the high-ranking officers in the Byzantine army convened in the war room beneath the palace. Their faces were grim, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on their shoulders. "We cannot hold out forever," General Justinian said, his voice hoarse from days of battle. "The siege is wearing us down. Food supplies are running low, and our people are beginning to lose faith. We need a solution, and we need it soon." Constans, too, sat in his throne, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. He had always been a man of conviction, but now, as the enemy forces seemed to close in, even his resolve was tested. "We have one advantage left, our faith. The people of Constantinople will not give in easily. We must remind them of the strength that lies in belief. This is not merely a war of armies. It is a war of ideologies." Justinian nodded in agreement, but his expression remained somber. "It may be too late for ideology. The Muslims have spread across vast regions with nothing but their belief and determination. Their faith has become their sword. Our faith will have to be stronger than ever if we are to prevail." On the other side of the Bosphorus, Rami ibn Khalid stood upon the deck of his flagship, his eyes narrowing as he watched the outline of Constantinople at dusk. The city was an imposing sight, its golden domes and towering walls still glittering in the dying light of day. It was a city of unimaginable wealth and beauty, but also of stubborn resistance. Despite the years of effort and countless battles, the Byzantines had held on to their city with all the ferocity of a people who believed they were divinely chosen to rule the world. Yet Rami's conviction was unshaken. He had fought for Islam across the lands of Africa, Asia, and beyond, and he knew that this city, like all others, would one day come under the light of the faith he held so dearly. But what made this siege different was not just the strength of the Byzantine Empire, but the idea that faith itself was the ultimate weapon in this struggle. For Rami, it was not only a military campaign, it was the final struggle between the old world and the new, between the decaying empires of the past and the vision of the future as ordained by Allah. Khalid ibn Umar, Rami's lieutenant and closest advisor, approached him quietly, breaking his deep concentration. "Commander," Khalid said, his voice respectful but firm, "we have broken through several of the outer walls. Soon the city will be within our reach." Rami turned to face him, his gaze unwavering. "Patience, Khalid. We are not just breaking through walls. We are breaking through hearts and minds. We must show them the truth of our faith, not just the might of our swords." Khalid raised an eyebrow. "You do not wish to press forward immediately? To strike while the Byzantines are still reeling from our attacks?" Rami smiled softly, his eyes filled with wisdom. "We are not like the empires that have come before us. Our victory will not just be a conquest of land. It will be the victory of truth over falsehood. When we enter the city, we must do so with the knowledge that we are not here to destroy, but to enlighten. As the siege stretched into its third week, the tension in the city became unbearable. The Byzantine defenders were running low on food, their stores dwindling as the Muslim forces continued to block their supply routes. The people of Constantinople, once so proud and confident in their faith and empire, now found themselves gripped by fear. The streets, once lively with the sounds of merchants and children, were now eerily silent, save for the occasional clang of iron and the murmurs of the faithful. Inside the Hagia Sophia, the clergy held nightly vigils, praying for divine intervention. The prayers rose to the heavens like a chorus of desperation, and yet, despite their fervor, a sense of hopelessness lingered in the air. The Byzantine soldiers were ready to die for their city, but even they were beginning to wonder if it was enough. In the streets, citizens gathered in small groups, whispering of the siege and the men who had come to challenge them. They spoke of Rami ibn Khalid with a mixture of awe and fear, for it was clear that he was no ordinary commander. His leadership, his faith, and his vision for the future of the world had inspired countless followers, and it was said that his name alone could rally entire armies. Yet even as the pressure mounted, there were those within the city who began to question their emperor's decisions. Some spoke of surrender, believing that the city's survival lay in opening its gates to the Muslims, in accepting their rule peacefully. Others, however, remained firm in their resolve. They would never yield to the invaders, no matter the cost. On the night of the 14th day, the battle for Constantinople reached its most intense phase. The Byzantine soldiers, battered and weakened, held the gates with everything they had left, their courage driven by faith in the Holy Trinity. But as the Muslim forces pressed closer, it became clear that the end was near. The walls of the city had begun to crack under the relentless pressure, and the sounds of battle echoed through the streets. Rami ibn Khalid, standing at the head of his army, called upon the soldiers to stand firm. "This is the moment we have fought for. Do not let fear consume you. We fight not for land, but for the light of Allah to shine upon the world. Today, Constantinople shall witness the truth." As the sun rose the following morning, a new chapter of history began to unfold. The city of Constantinople, after weeks of siege, was finally on the brink of surrender. The walls that had stood for centuries were no longer an impenetrable barrier. The Byzantine Empire, which had once ruled with unrivaled power, was now facing its ultimate test. In the heart of the city, the citizens gathered in silence, waiting for their fate to be decided. Would they be conquered, or would they rise once more in defense of their beloved city? For both the Byzantines and the Muslims, The answer to this question would not just determine the future of a city. It would shape the course of history for generations to come. As the sun broke through the clouds on the morning of the 15th day, the smell of smoke and the sound of distant battle filled the air. The once beautiful skyline of Constantinople, with its gleaming domes and intricate minarets, had been scarred by the brutal siege. The grand walls, which had stood for centuries, were now pocked with craters from the Muslim artillery, and the sounds of war rang out from every corner of the city. Rami ibn Khalid, the commander of the Muslim forces, stood at the front of his army, eyes narrowed in intense concentration. The city was within their reach, but he knew that the final assault would be the most difficult yet. His troops had fought relentlessly, but it was not just military strength that would win this battle. It was their faith, their unwavering belief that this was their destined moment. "You must remember, brothers," Rami said to his officers, his voice low but commanding. "This is not merely a war of conquest. It is a battle for the soul of this city. We fight not only for victory, but for the spreading of our message, the message of faith, of peace, of the truth of Allah's words." His soldiers, some battle-worn and weary, looked to him with determination in their eyes. They were not simply soldiers of the sword. They were warriors of faith, believing in the cause they had come to serve. For them, this was more than a conquest. It was a divine mission. Meanwhile, inside the walls of Constantinople, the Byzantine defenders had been preparing for what they knew would be their last stand. The Emperor, Constans II, had already sent emissaries to Rami with the proposal of surrender, but deep down, he knew that the outcome was inevitable. The strength of the Muslim forces, their unity, and their belief seemed insurmountable. He had hoped for divine intervention, but the heavens had remained silent. Theophilus, one of Constance's generals, stood beside him, his face pale with exhaustion and worry. "Your Majesty, we cannot hold out much longer. The walls are breached and our people are growing desperate. There is talk of surrender, of opening the gates to spare our lives. What should we do?" Constance's face was heavy with the weight of the decision. His empire was crumbling, and with it, the ideals he had held dear. "We cannot surrender," Constans replied, his voice filled with a deep, sorrowful conviction. "This city, this empire, has stood for centuries. It has been the heart of Christianity, the bastion of our faith and civilization. I cannot allow it to fall without a fight." "But what of our people, Your Majesty?" Theophilus pressed, his concern evident. "We cannot ask them to die for a cause that is already lost." A long silence followed, and Constans II, lost in his thoughts, looked out over the battlements of his palace. For a fleeting moment, he considered the idea of yielding. Perhaps the Muslims would allow them to retain some semblance of their faith. Perhaps the city could survive in some form. But deep inside, he knew that the very essence of his empire, the belief in their superiority, the arrogance of centuries of dominance, would not allow him to make such a compromise. "No," Constans said resolutely. "We will fight to the end. The walls of Constantinople will stand strong, and we will show the world the true strength of our faith." The clash of armies outside the city reached its peak. The Muslim forces, under the leadership of Rami ibn Khalid, began their final push, aiming to break through the remaining Byzantine defenses. The men of Constantinople, though weary and outnumbered, fought with a fierce determination that could only come from a belief in the sanctity of their cause. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, the crash of swords, the screams of warriors, the pounding of war drums. In the streets, citizens huddled in terror, unsure of what would become of them. Those who had lost loved ones in the early days of the siege now faced the prospect of even greater loss. Families prayed in their homes, clutching onto their crosses and icons, as though they could protect them from the violence unfolding outside. As the battle raged, Rami ibn Khalid led the charge, his steel-blue eyes burning with intensity. He could feel the weight of history upon his shoulders. The siege of Constantinople was not just a victory for Islam. It was a turning point in the history of the world. To defeat the Byzantine Empire was to change the very course of civilization. For Rami, this was the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. The Byzantine defenders, however, fought with equal ferocity. Alexios, a young Byzantine soldier, stood at the wall, his sword clutched tightly in his hands. His body was covered in blood, his face smeared with dirt. Yet he had not faltered. He had grown up in the shadow of the great city, and he knew what was at stake. "We cannot let them take this city," Alexios whispered to his fellow soldiers. "This city is more than a city. It is the heart of our faith, the last bastion of Christendom." But as the Muslim forces pressed forward, the weight of the situation became clear. The Byzantine army was no longer the formidable force it had once been. Years of corruption, civil strife, and internal division had weakened them. The soldiers, though brave, lacked the unity and discipline of their enemies. At the city gates, Rami ibn Khalid's forces launched their final assault. Their battering rams struck the gates with a deafening boom, and the sound of splintering wood echoed through the streets. With each strike, the once impenetrable gates of Constantinople began to give way. The Muslim soldiers surged forward, pushing their way into the heart of the city. As the gates of Constantinople fell, the fate of the city was sealed. The Muslim forces flooded into the streets, their warriors calling out the names of Allah as they surged through the once proud walls. The Byzantine defenders, though brave to the end, were overwhelmed by the sheer force of the Muslim onslaught. The clash of steel rang out, and the streets ran with blood. Yet, even as the city began to fall, the people of Constantinople held on to their faith. In the Hagia Sophia, the clergy continued their prayers, lifting their voices in a final act of defiance. They called upon the Holy Trinity, asking for divine mercy even as the city around them was consumed by the flames of war. Rami ibn Khalid, watching the fall of the city from the steps of the great palace, knew that this victory would not be without cost. As his soldiers swept through the streets, he was struck by the devastation of it all. The once grand palaces and churches of Constantinople, symbols of Byzantine glory, were now reduced to rubble. The people, broken and defeated, looked up at him, some with fear, others with resignation. Yet, there were those who saw in Rami's victory not just a defeat, but a new hope. For the first time in centuries, the people of Constantinople would know the message of Islam. The city, now under Muslim rule, would become a beacon of faith, a place where the light of the Quran would shine brightly. As the smoke of battle began to clear, the sun rose over the fallen city of Constantinople, casting a soft golden light over the ruins. For Rami ibn Khalid, this was a moment of both triumph and reflection. His forces had taken the city, but he could not help but feel the weight of what had transpired. This was not just a victory on the battlefield. It was the beginning of a new era. As the day unfolded, Rami walked through the streets of Constantinople, observing the transformation that was taking place. His soldiers, having fought with unwavering devotion, now turned their attention to rebuilding the city, not as a symbol of destruction, but as a symbol of faith and unity. In the Hagia Sophia, the Byzantine clergy, though defeated, bowed their heads in respect. They had fought to the end, but now they understood the inevitability of change. As Rami stood before the great cathedral, he turned to his men and spoke softly, but with unwavering conviction. This is the moment we have all fought for. This is the dawn of a new chapter in the history of the world. Let us remember that we are not conquerors. We are bearers of the truth. Let the light of Islam shine brightly in this city, for it is the will of Allah that we are here. And so, the siege of Constantinople came to an end, not just with the fall of walls and gates, but with the dawn of a new era, an era of faith, unity, and the spread of Islam. For Rami ibn Khalid and his army, this victory was not just the conquest of a city. It was the beginning of a greater journey, one that would change the course of history forever. The days following the fall of Constantinople were filled with uncertainty and change. The city, though physically broken, was a place of immense spiritual significance. Rami ibn Khalid, now the de facto ruler of this once mighty Christian capital, faced the monumental task of healing the deep wounds of conquest while guiding the city into its new era. For the first time in its history, the vibrant city by the Bosphorus was under the banner of Islam. The Muslim army, having tasted victory, began to settle into the city. But despite their triumph, many of the soldiers were struck by the complexity of their new role. They were no longer just conquerors. They were now bearers of a profound responsibility. Their mission was not only to hold the city, but to show its people the path of peace that Islam offered. Rami, ever the pious leader, understood the weight of the moment. He saw the faces of those around him, men and women who had once been enemies, and knew that their hearts, much like the city itself, needed time to heal. While many Byzantine soldiers had fled or been killed in the chaos, countless others had surrendered, uncertain of their fate, in a city now controlled by the Muslims. It was during these trying days that Rami met Anna, a young Byzantine noblewoman whose family had been deeply entrenched in the ruling circles of Constantinople. Her father, a former senator, had been one of the last to hold out against the Muslim forces. Now, with the city lost, she and her remaining family members found themselves caught in a world that no longer made sense to them. Anna had always been a quiet observer of her empire's politics, more interested in the works of poets and philosophers than in the intrigues of the court. But the fall of Constantinople shattered everything she had ever known. Her world, once defined by the Christian faith, was now one where the call to prayer echoed through the streets, and the sounds of the Quran filled the air. One evening, as the shadows of twilight began to fall, Rami encountered Anna near the Hagia Sophia. She was sitting on a stone bench, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. She seemed out of place, her fine clothes dusted with the grime of a city under siege. Rami, noticing her solemnity, approached cautiously. He had heard whispers of her family, of their prominence in the Byzantine world. He did not know if she would welcome his company, but he had learned that in moments of such upheaval, understanding and compassion could bridge even the deepest divides. Lady Anna, Rami said softly, the city is still grieving, but we must not let it remain in sorrow. Even amidst destruction, there is the potential for renewal. Anna turned to face him, her eyes clear but filled with a quiet sadness. Renewal? She repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. What renewal can there be in a city that has lost everything? What of our faith, our heritage? Rami took a seat beside her. Faith, Lady Anna, is not confined to buildings or traditions. It lives in the hearts of people. I do not ask you to abandon your past, but to see that there is more than one path to truth. Anna's brow furrowed. You speak of faith, yet you have conquered my city. You've brought with you war, bloodshed, and destruction. How can you say you offer peace? The question hung in the air between them, and Rami felt the weight of her words. But he also knew the truth that lay in his heart. I offer peace, he said, after a long pause. But peace must be earned. It is not something that can be handed down easily. In this city, there is much to rebuild, not just in its walls, but in the hearts of its people. My people and yours are now one in this new chapter. Anna remained silent for a long moment, her eyes scanning the horizon. Slowly the soft glow of the evening sun began to lighten the heavy atmosphere between them. Rami's words lingered in her mind, though she did not know if she could accept them yet. But something in his calm demeanor, in the sincerity of his faith, stirred a deep, hidden yearning for understanding in her. The days that followed were filled with the challenging work of establishing a new rule in a conquered city. The once mighty Byzantine Empire was now a shadow of itself, its rulers gone, and its people divided. The Byzantines were proud, resilient, and deeply tied to their Christian identity. For Rami, the challenge was not just military, but diplomatic. He had to maintain order, while also ensuring that the citizens of Constantinople felt that they were not simply subjects under foreign rule, but participants in a new, shared destiny. Rami appointed trusted officers to oversee various aspects of the city's reconstruction. One of the first tasks was to reopen the Hagia Sophia, the majestic cathedral that had long been the heart of Byzantine worship. Though it was now under Muslim control, Rami saw the importance of allowing the Christians to continue their practices. For him, Islam did not seek to erase the past, but to build upon it, to bring people to a deeper understanding of the oneness of God, regardless of their previous beliefs. He also knew that many Christians had stayed behind, not out of submission, but out of a hope that they might yet influence the future of their city. They too saw Constantinople as a city of faith, but now they had to reconcile their faith with the new political reality. Rami allowed the Christian leaders of the city to continue their gatherings, provided that they did so peacefully. This was a time of delicate diplomacy, and Rami sought to prove that the Muslim forces were not mere conquerors. They were bringers of a new, inclusive message. As the days wore on, Anna and Rami met frequently, drawn together by their shared conversations. Anna had once been a proud defender of the Byzantine ways, a woman who believed deeply in the Christian narrative of the world. Yet, as she observed Rami's leadership, her hardened heart began to soften. She saw that the change that had come to her city was not entirely one of destruction, but one of reformation. For Rami, Anna became more than just a symbol of the city's past. She became a symbol of the potential for unity and reconciliation between people of different faiths and backgrounds. He found in her a strength and wisdom that made him rethink some of his own views about leadership and faith. One evening, as they walked along the shores of the Bosphorus, watching the waves reflect the fading light of the sun, Rami turned to Anna and said, In time, this city will become a beacon of light. People from all over will come to see the truth of Islam, but they will also come to see the unity that can be forged when faiths learn to coexist. Anna looked at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. "I have seen much in my time," she said, her voice soft, "and I have heard many promises, but perhaps there is truth in what you say. Perhaps this city, with all its history and faith, can become something greater than what it has been." Rami smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. "It will not be easy. There will be many obstacles along the way. But if we work together, we can bring light to this world." In the months that followed, the rebuilding of Constantinople was slow but steady. The scars of the siege would never fully heal, but the city began to change in subtle ways. More and more people began to embrace the new reality, not as something to be feared, but as something to be lived. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all found their place in the city, working together to rebuild, to find common ground in the rubble of war. Rama's role as a leader continued to evolve. He became not only the ruler of Constantinople, but a symbol of the potential for interfaith harmony. Under his leadership, the once great city began to see the dawning of a new era, an era where the divisions of the past might one day give way to a more unified world. As for Anna, she too began to see the city in a new light. No longer a woman caught in the web of her empire's fading glory, she was becoming a part of something far greater than she had ever imagined. In Rami, she saw not just a conqueror, but a man of deep conviction, a leader who sought to guide not through force, but through understanding. And as the sun set each evening over the city, both Rami and Anna knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. But they also knew that, together, they could help to forge a new future, a future where faith, love, and understanding would shine brighter than ever before. In the end, Constantinople was no longer just a city of the past. It had become a city of hope, a beacon of faith and love for the world to see. And it was in this new dawn that both Rami and Anna realized that sometimes the greatest conquests are not of cities, but of hearts. The months that followed the fall of Constantinople continued to reshape the city, its people, and its future. The process of rebuilding was not just one of stone and mortar, but of hearts and minds. The Byzantines had once seen themselves as the heirs of the Roman Empire, invincible and proud, but now they were forced to live under new rulers who, despite their military victory, understood the power of compassion and reconciliation. As the Muslim forces settled in, many Byzantine citizens found that their new rulers were not the ruthless conquerors they had imagined. Rami ibn Khaled, the leader of the Muslim forces, was not simply a warrior, but a man deeply dedicated to justice and mercy. He led with wisdom, showing respect for the traditions of the people, while introducing the ideals of Islam that promised unity under the oneness of God. His vision was clear. Constantinople, the city once divided by centuries of religious and political strife, could be a beacon of peace for the world. It could serve as a model where different faiths, Muslim, Christian, and Jew, could live together in harmony, bound by common values of love, respect, and faith. As the days passed, Anna found herself at a crossroads. She had been born into the Byzantine nobility, a world defined by power, wealth, and pride. She had once believed that only through the preservation of the Byzantine Christian faith could the city thrive. But now, she was living in a world where her faith was no longer the dominant force, and the streets of Constantinople echoed with the sounds of the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, rather than the Christian bells she had once known. Yet, instead of feeling oppressed, she began to see a different side to the new rule. The Muslims, though conquering the city, did not force their faith upon her or her people. They respected the Byzantine Christian religion, even going so far as to ensure that Christian religious leaders could continue their worship in the great church of Hagia Sophia. The once grand cathedral, now transformed into a mosque, still held the whispers of its Christian past, but it had also become a symbol of tolerance, a meeting point for the two worlds. Anna began to frequent the Hagia Sophia, not as a visitor but as a participant. She observed the daily prayers of the Muslims, saw their peaceful devotion, and listened intently to the teachings of Rami and the scholars who now resided in the city. Her heart, once hardened by the walls of her own beliefs, slowly began to open to the possibility that faith was not a dividing force, but a unifying one. In her private moments, Anna found herself meditating on the verses of the Quran, seeking understanding. She had been taught that the Muslim faith was a foreign, threatening force. But now, she saw that it was simply another path to God. Rami's compassion and wisdom had begun to chip away at the walls of resistance in her heart. Meanwhile, the city was beginning to form a new identity. As the Muslim forces integrated with the Byzantine citizens, Rami made it clear that leadership was to be shared. He appointed people from both Muslim and Christian backgrounds to oversee various sectors of the city. The former generals of the Byzantine army, although defeated, were not executed but instead asked to join in the rebuilding efforts. Their military experience and knowledge of the city's defenses were invaluable. The Byzantine aristocracy, now reduced in number but not entirely removed from power, was integrated into the new leadership structure. Many former nobles saw Rami's call for unity as an opportunity for redemption, and they worked alongside the Muslim leaders to restore the city's economy, infrastructure, and security. They began to see the wisdom of Rami's approach and recognized that their city's survival would not lie in the division of faiths, but in their cooperation. Years passed, and the city continued to flourish under the leadership of Rami ibn Khalid and his growing coalition of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The walls of Constantinople, though still scarred from the war, now symbolized a new era of resilience and unity. The people of the city were no longer divided by their faiths, but were united by their shared humanity. The Bosphorus, once a symbol of isolation between the East and West, became a symbol of unity as the great city of Constantinople lay at the crossroads of both continents. Traders from all over the world passed through its waters, bringing with them goods, ideas, and cultures from both the Christian West and the Muslim East. Rami's leadership was characterized not by conquest, but by the wisdom of understanding. He did not seek to erase the Byzantine identity, but rather to integrate it into the broader Islamic vision of peace. Under his guidance, the city began to thrive once again, not as a Byzantine stronghold, but as a beacon of peace and understanding. The once divided people of Constantinople began to rebuild their lives, finding common ground in their shared experiences and struggles. The city became a vibrant center of learning, where scholars from all faiths gathered to discuss philosophy, science, and theology. The libraries, once filled only with Christian texts, now contained works from both the Quran and the Bible, as well as Greek, Roman, and Persian philosophical traditions. In the quiet moments of peace that followed the tumultuous days of war, Rami and Anna found themselves once again walking along the shores of the Bosphorus, this time not as conqueror and conquered, but as partners in a shared vision. Anna had come to see Rami not just as a leader of the Muslims, but as a man of deep faith and wisdom. She had witnessed his gentleness, his understanding, and his unwavering belief in the power of compassion. Through his guidance, she had learned to see beyond the surface, to see that love, regardless of its expression, was a powerful force that could transcend religious and cultural boundaries. As they walked together, Anna took Rami's hand and spoke softly. "You have shown me a different way, Rami, a way where faith and love are not in conflict, but are in harmony. I have learned that no matter our differences, we are all part of something greater than ourselves." Rami smiled, his heart full of the same understanding. "In the end, Anna, it is not the walls of cities that define us, but the hearts of the people within them. Our faith teaches us that love is the key to unity, and that when we seek to understand one another, we can overcome the greatest of obstacles." As the sun set over the Bosphorus, casting its golden light over the city that had witnessed the rise and fall,